For this video lesson, I'm going to instruct you how to graph compound inequalities. So first you need to understand the difference between the words and or. So for the word and, you need to understand that it is the intersection of our shading. So what do the two graphs have in common in terms of their shading? So what we will be looking for is the overlapping. So we want to know where the two sit, what they have in common. For the word or means the union. So what we will be looking for is the intersection, and if it's a solution for one, it would be a solution for the other. So we would be looking for the intersection and for just a separate shading. So first let's look at a graph with the word and. We're going to graph x is less than 4 and x is greater than or equal to 2. So we will look at the graph x is less than 4. We have an open circle and we're shading less than 4. The graph x is greater than or equal to, we'll have a closed circle and we're shading greater than 2. So now what we're going to do is we're going to combine the graphs. So think about taking one graph and mapping it directly on top of the other. And what we will be looking for is the intersection of these two graphs. For the word and, we're looking for the intersection. Where do they intersect? They intersect between the numbers 2 and 4. And so that's what our final graph will look like. We will still keep a closed circle at 2 and an open circle at 4. So now let's look at the word or. Again, you should graph each graph separately. So there is x is less than 2. And here is the graph of x is greater than or equal to 4. And then we want to overlap our graphs, combine them. For the word or, we are looking for all the shading. It doesn't matter if they intersect or not. So this would be our final graph. We're going to include less than 2 or greater than 4. Which of the following inequalities describes the following graph? When you see a graph like this, you need to know the difference between does it represent an and or does it represent an or. In this case, since we only have shading between -3 and -1, this would represent an and, the intersection between our two graphs of -3 and 1. So we're looking at options 2 and 4. We want greater than 3, -3, but less than -1, which would be option 2. Now we're going to graph the compound inequality -6 is less than m, which is less than 8. When you see this notation, you need to realize that it represents the word and. So we should really be reading this as 6 is less than m and m is less than 8. We are just saving ourselves time of not writing the word and we're also just writing the letter m one time. The problem with this notation is the first inequality is written backwards. 6 is less than m, we really want to have written as m is greater than 6. So if m is greater than 6 and it's also less than 8, we want to have a graph where we only have shading between 6 and 8. Which is equivalent to -3 less than y less than 5. Again, hopefully you now see this notation and know that it represents the word and. And just be careful, this first inequality you should be reading as y is greater than -3, which would be option 2. Which is equivalent to x is less than -5 and if x is greater than -5 and x is less than or equal to 1. Hopefully you have picked option 1. Okay, we're going to look at 2 more graphs using the word or. We're going to graph x is less than 2 or x is greater than or equal to 4. Remember, for the word or, we're going to include all the shading of both graphs. So this is what our final answer would look like. Here is x is less than 2 And here is the graph of x is greater than or equal to 4. So that would be our final graph. We're including the shading of both graphs. One or the other needs to be included. And here is our final compound inequality. We are going to graph x is greater than or equal to -1 or x is less than or equal to 3. So this is actually the solution to this graph. It would be the entire number line. So let's work backwards this time. X is greater than or equal to -1. So here is our -1. This would be filled in, and we would be graphing everything greater than -1. Here would be x is greater than or less than or equal to, so there's our circle, it's filled in, not very well, and everything less than. For the word or, we want to include all of the shading for both graphs. So that's going to include everything greater than -1 and everything less than 3. So that includes everything between -1 and 3 and everything that's actually greater than 3, because this graph continues to go to the right forever and the bottom one continues to go to the left forever. So we're going to shade everything on our number line because or includes all shading. I hope you've learned a little bit about graphing compound inequalities. When we get to class, we'll continue to practice and we'll talk about some other situations between the word and or. It's important that you know the word and is the intersection of the two solutions and that the word or will be the union of the two solutions. I look forward to seeing you in class.